our technical facilitator, Jesse Poole.
All right, welcome to our virtual Plan Commission meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. To members and city staff, members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. The chair, clerk, and technical facilitator are responsible for muting and unmuting committee members. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. During any roll call, all panelists will be unmuted briefly. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which their hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the commission, please send it to the email listed in today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First on the agenda is Agenda Item 1, Legistar 60306, Plan Commission Public Comment Period, and we do not have any public comments today. Next is disclosures and recusals. Members of the body should make any required disclosures or recusals under the city's ethics code. Do we have any disclosures or recusals? Seeing no raised hands, looks like we don't. And I would like to say one thing. I just want to thank you all for being here, the second Plan Commission meeting of this week. So thank you very much. That goes for both Plan Commissioners and city staff who are taking the second evening of the week. So thank you. Next is special item of business, Agenda Item 2, Legistar 70575, which is an overview of Metro Transit Network redesign. And Philip Gritzmeyer is going to give us a brief overview. Philip, please go ahead.
Thank you for the introduction. I will share my screen. Is everyone able to see this?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for the invite here. My name is Philip Gritzmacher. I am a transportation planner with the City of Madison Department of Transportation. And I'm going to talk with you a little bit about the transit network redesign. So first, the purpose of the transit network redesign is to design a route system that better meets the needs of Madison area residents and businesses. So this is a complete redesign of the system, and it's very complex, and there may be things that you want to take a look at in more detail. At the bottom of the screen is a website where we have all of the detail about this project, including where public meetings are going to be and route maps. And I would highly encourage you to go there and check things out if you have any additional questions. So I think it's best to start out pre-COVID and take a look at the route system that we had before the pandemic. And there are a few things to notice about this route system. It's a pulse-based system focused around the transfer points that extends to basically all corners of the community. There are also a number of routes, as is demonstrated by the number of routes that you see meeting at the Capitol Square and other parts or other portions of the community. And this is part of the reason why we are addressing this right now. There are a number of long-standing issues and discrepancies with the system. The system has service that can be complicated for someone new to navigate. We know that there are portions of the community where it requires multiple transfers to get to where people need to go. And this is an opportunity to address some of those concerns. We also know that people's travel patterns have changed during the pandemic. We want to ensure that the new system reflects the future needs of the community. And we're also implementing BRT. We want to make sure that the benefits of BRT are extended into the neighborhoods throughout the community by ensuring that the local bus system connects well with that system and functions well within the new framework of transit in the area. And because of that, we are focusing on areas outside of the BRT corridor and seeking to improve service in those areas, make it more legible, and make it connect in with the BRT system. So as we began designing this new transit network, there were two ways that we could really go with the system. We could either focus on ridership or coverage. And a system that focuses on coverage would really concentrate service onto fewer corridors, but have very improved frequencies along those corridors. And that would likely lead to increased ridership. Alternatively, the coverage-based model would extend transit service to as many people as possible, regardless of the frequency of the service or the number of transfers that someone would need to take to get somewhere. So that resembles our existing system a little bit more. So we created some illustrative routes and draft routes and brought those to the Transportation Policy and Planning Board and asked for policy direction that they want us to go towards a ridership alternative or a coverage alternative. And the TPPB directed staff to pursue an alternative that was ridership mostly, but spread some of the frequencies out to reach more portions of the community, which aligned with some of the public engagement that we had as well. So the ridership alternative that was presented, and this is kind of the two extremes. The coverage was, extending coverage throughout the entire community. Ridership focused the coverage in as few in the areas that we would anticipate would generate the most ridership. So this is the ridership alternative, and what you can see is that there are areas throughout the community that don't have service that is as frequent as you might anticipate. The areas that do have service, the areas, the dark red, for instance, around 80, that's every 10 minutes or less. The red is every 15 minutes or less. The blue right here is 30 minutes. And then the light blue, which isn't present on this map, would be hourly. There are also some peak-only routes. And what you're seeing right now is the service that you would anticipate midday during the service. So it's definitely, we're spreading out the service throughout the day to ensure that you would have access to the system regardless of when you're traveling. But that leaves some holes in the system, particularly on the southwest side, the southeast side, and the north side, where there is currently service that operates throughout the day and extends further into the community. And what would be replaced under the ridership alternative would be peak-only service that wouldn't provide residents necessarily with as good a service as they have right now. So a new alternative was developed that reduced some of the high-frequency service. So between the previous map, and I'll flip back and forth a couple of times so you can see what we've done. There are the Adana corridor here in Tokay, those were reduced. The frequency of these areas was reduced. A bit of Cottage Grove was reduced. And some of the 30-minute routes reconfigured so that we could extend hourly service and half-hourly service into areas, deeper into areas that we hadn't been covering before. But this is all still a work in progress. We are currently going out to sub areas within the community, seeking resident feedback and ensuring that the routes that we have line up with the needs of the community. So right now, we have all of these sub area meetings, and we are developing plausible amendments to the draft plan to ensure that the service that is in the final plan meets the needs of the community. These amendments will be presented to City of Madison policymakers, who will ultimately decide which of these amendments will be included within the plan. And there are some key takeaways that I want you to have with the new system. First, the new routes are going to be longer, straighter, and more frequent, and that's throughout the entire day. So the goal is to ensure that the lower income residents that are living in the peripheral neighborhoods will experience less waiting, and then the barriers to accessing jobs and other destinations will be greatly reduced through some of this onboard surveys that we've had and some of the public engagement. We know that in the periphery, sometimes folks need to take one or two transfers to get to where they need to go, and the trips can be much, much longer than would be tolerable for most people, and that this should reduce that. As a part of that, the transfer points would be eliminated. The transfer points for a number of trips end up creating indirection and delays where people need to wait for their next bus to come and transfer between buses. And the aim of this new design would be to reduce that. As I mentioned earlier, there would be the service would be spread throughout the day. So rather than facilitating the traditional downtown 8 to 5 commute that the existing system serves, the service would be spread throughout the day, which would make it more useful for people that have a less predictable schedule, working jobs that might not follow that 8 to 5 pattern, such as jobs in retail that require slightly different schedules. And in general, the system would be far simpler, more logical, and easier to use. So as I mentioned, right now we have a number of geographically focused meetings in specific areas of the community, and we're seeking feedback to refine the route and ensure that it works well for the community. We also have an online survey that's at the website that I mentioned earlier, and I'll put that back up on the screen in just a minute. The aim is to have the plan approved this coming summer, with implementation coming next summer. And with that, I'm open for any questions that you might have, and I have colleagues here from the Department of Transportation as well to help with that. I appreciate the ability to present to you.
Thank you, Philip. Are there any questions? I would just note, as you all know, transportation and access to transportation certainly impacts our development patterns and what we can expect and encourage. So clearly this is important to our deliberations on a number of fronts. So are there any questions that you have? Commissioner Shepherd.
Hi, just a quick question about the transfer points. What will happen with to those?
Thank you for that question. So there are, and I might lean on some other staff members. I believe that each transfer point has their own, there will be different outcomes for each of them. There were discussions this morning, for instance, about the South transfer point. Mike or Tom, would you happen to have more information about the transfer points?
Yeah, Mike Chakvala, City Transportation Department. We own 2 of the transfer points and we lease 2 of them. So we don't know what will become of them, but presumably they would be converted to some other use. They could be housing or retail redeveloped into something else. But we would not have any more use of them. The ones that we lease, we would simply not lease anymore. And so it would be sort of up to them. The West transfer point is in a pretty greenfield environment, so I think probably that would simply be restored to whatever. But yeah, the answer is we don't know. It'd be land that would be for you to use for something else.
Yeah, I might add that DPEDCD is assembling properties on that block with the South transfer point, and so it's likely that the South transfer point might be combined with the adjacent parcel and redeveloped, and so those the trading and assembling of properties are occurring probably over the next several months, and will probably appear before you at some point.
All right. Thank you.
Are there other questions? Seeing no raised, here's one. Commissioner Cantrell.
Just a couple. I'm assuming the BRT route will be implemented at the same time as these other transit routes are put in place?
That's correct. The service patterns would change at the same time, and the BRT service pattern would go into effect with this.
Okay. My last question is, will the city follow up in 2 or 3 years to determine the ridership on these routes to see if they're actually working the way you expected, and maybe then tweaking, if you have to, some of the routes to make them more efficient or provide more service or better service?
Yes, the short answer is yes. The city would be evaluating the performance of the system and making adjustments. I would anticipate that as this is implemented, there will be areas where the outcomes aren't what we anticipate, and changes will be needed, and that would certainly be something that would occur.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Alder Foster. You're muted.
There we go. Okay. Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to on that last question, just I know there a lot of folks have asked a similar thing, and it's a little bit confusing. So as Philip said, the service patterns will go into place, but I think to also be clear, BRT itself in terms of buses, stations, etc. Just to confirm, that will not be happening summer of next year, correct?
That's correct. So it will still be the normal 45-foot buses as the BRT system is constructed. So it'll be the service pattern, but not the actual BRT buses and facilities. Those will be constructed at that time.
And you want to just share what is the timeline for the BRT buses and station reconstruction, et cetera?
Absolutely. That would occur the following years when that would be implemented.
Yeah, maybe a slightly more detailed answer is that we hope, providing we get all the approvals and everything, to have an advanced early project, a small early works project, even as early as this fall. And then construction in 2023 would span the full year, as quite a, and then the early part of 2024, we would be testing the system with the buses and the drivers and the like, and it probably wouldn't go into revenue service until mid 2024. So you think about it, there's a this is a over $170 million project, and so it's now a third of that is buses, but even getting that many buses that quickly is a challenge. And these are not just ordinary buses, right? They're electric buses, and so the technology on that is new, and making sure that they last, from one end of the city to the other end of the city, So it's really exciting, but I don't want to. This is not a small project. It's a big project.
Thank you, Tom. Alder Alboris.
Hello, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for the presentation. Would you mind just repeating, for the benefit of folks that I know are going to listen to this recording, from constituents that I know that are really intrigued by this project, the intentions that you had, or like the sort of policy decision or like design around the ridership of the workforce that may not have the traditional 9 to 5, which is likely going to be, like you said, folks that work in retail who, as we've seen during the pandemic, have been considered essential workforce, and so are such a critical and key sort of backbone to any healthy economy. Can you just share again, for my benefit and for folks that may be listening in, some of the design that you have to incorporate or sort of accommodate that demographic of ridership?
Absolutely. So what is occurring with this new design is that we are spreading the service throughout the day. So rather than being as peak oriented as the system currently is, where there are more buses on the road during the traditional office hours, 8 to 5, where you'd have a lot of buses in the morning and a lot of buses in the evening, the service would be available throughout the day. There would be a high frequency of service in the midday and in the evening to accommodate non-traditional sorts of trips. So jobs that such as retail jobs, healthcare jobs, would be easier to access with higher frequency service. And the way that this is occurring is the number of routes out there are being consolidated. This is a restructuring of the existing service hours. So the service hours are being consolidated into some of these corridors, and the service hours being spread throughout the day. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Seeing no other raised hands, we will move on to agenda item 3, Legistar 70576, update and discussion of transit-oriented development overlay zoning. And the first person who's going to speak to that is Ben Zellers. And then, Ben, if you would introduce any others that you pass the presentation off to.
Sure, yes. Thank you. Yeah, I'll share my screen here. Colin Punt, Heather Stouter also are present here in this meeting, and all of us are available to answer questions as we get through the presentation later on. So I guess let me know if you can't see any things. I'm trying to share my slide deck here. But as far as what I'm going to be covering in this presentation, just do a quick recap of the last Plan Commission meeting where TOD overlay was discussed. This is now the third discussion that we've had on TOD overlay. I have an updated TOD overlay boundary and kind of walk through how we arrived at the current version. A little bit more analysis on auto-oriented uses, which the Commission had requested at the last meeting. Have a few case study example parcels. We have more than I'm sharing in this presentation, but just want to give some examples as part of this meeting tonight. A little bit on public engagement and a proposed timeline for this work, or the remainder of this work, and then turn it back over to the Commission for questions and discussion. We have 5 specific questions, but certainly open to anything the Commission wants to cover. So this is not a full summary of the December 10th Plan Commission discussion, but there was general consensus on a number of things that we should, as staff, explore options for opt-in or possible appropriate locations for an extension of the quarter mile that had initially been brought to you. The general approach to permitting the next level up of intensity for development is good. The approach to auto-oriented uses, as I mentioned, needs further refinement. So I'll be talking about that a little bit more tonight. Raising the maximum height for some districts within TOD overlay is okay. So what you'll be seeing tonight does do that for some districts. Parking minimums and allowance to exceed parking maximums should be removed in TOD. And then 2-unit buildings and 1 ADU should be allowed for any lot meeting the existing minimum lot area requirements for single-family zoning districts. And then just wanted to emphasize and stress that there's a very large packet for the Commission and be covering a subset of that information. But if you want to delve into any details, we have a lot of analysis and further mapping that is available that I won't be sharing tonight as part of this presentation. So as far as the draft overlay TOD area that we have, this is what we've arrived at through further analysis and based off of some of the feedback that we got from the Commission at previous meetings. So we're showing the East-West BRT overlay area as phase 1, which is dark purple. And that is using the quarter mile buffer or a quarter mile to either side of that route as the starting point. But then we did add in additional area to that, primarily on the eastern edge, eastern terminus, and on the western terminus. So you can see at the west, it extends all the way from Mineral Point to the Beltline, kind of through Research Park in some areas, and that's pretty much a full half mile on that location. We're also showing some additional area south of Regent Street, a little bit of additional area to the north of Gorham and Johnson, and then kind of taking that down a little bit to the south of East Wash to Atwood, and then including essentially all of East Town Mall, as well as an addition to the quarter mile that we had started with. Then we're showing future phases for high-frequency local transit and north-south BRT. These stick to that quarter mile a little bit more just because of the nature of the development around those areas and how we're able to capture a lot of the prospects for transit-oriented redevelopment with that quarter mile. And this is shown as future phases, but in reality, if high-frequency local service is adopted this summer, there is a possibility that this could come online for that local service at the same time as East-West BRT. For the North-South BRT, I think that would probably wait until the Council adopts a locally preferred alternative for that, but certainly that's up to the Commission and Council to make the final determination. So a little bit on how we arrived at that. So backing up, we had a quarter mile around the east-west BRT line. This is largely what had been brought to the commission previously. So that was kind of the starting point. We expanded that area, as I had mentioned, focusing really on the east and west terminus, but with some other additional areas. And added in the high-frequency local transit, shown here in blue, in the north-south TOD area around BRT, shown in green. Then we actually ended up starting to subtract a few areas. So we subtracted the UW campus, really because that is governed by an adopted campus master plan. So with that master planning effort, there's very little that TOD could contribute. A TOD overlay could contribute to that, and then subtracted downtown as well, largely because that's already very transit-oriented, and also because that's already governed by maximum heights downtown. And there are also, of course, a lot of historic districts present downtown as well. And so that was our next subtraction, was local and national historic districts. And so we removed those from the TOD areas as well. And so that's how we ended up with what we're showing to you here tonight. And overall, the area remaining in both shades of purple is about 12.4 square miles, which is about 15% of the city's area. Touching on auto-oriented uses a little bit, this is a chart of auto-oriented uses for those TOD areas, both shades of purple, so to speak. So number of auto repair, auto sales, a lot of gas stations, a number of drive-throughs of various types, kind of limited car, truck rental, but overall adding up to 188 establishments. This is through analysis of the city land use data and Google Maps. There may be one or two that we missed, but I think this is a pretty good representation of auto-oriented uses within these TOD areas. So this is a map of them. You can, by different type, and you can see really how they're clustered in some areas. Certainly the West Town area, South Park Street, south of the river, and then certainly out towards East Town Mall as well. So these are probably areas most people would expect, kind of out closer to the highways and areas that are currently more auto-oriented themselves, but could potentially, through TOD overlay and bus rapid transit service, transition to more transit-friendly areas. So as far as what we're proposing as staff for your consideration, looking at whether it would be appropriate to implement current TSS drive-through regulations for all TOD areas. So just recapping real quickly, that means that vehicle access sales and service windows, the zoning speak for drive-throughs, shall be located under the building in which it's located, and the building shall have commercial residential uses along the primary street frontage. So that would be expanded from TSS to all drive-throughs that would be located in these TOD areas. So we don't really have any additional auto-oriented use regulations for your discussion tonight, but would note that all non-SRC and non-TRC districts would start at a 2-story building height minimum in TOD. So this would apply to auto-oriented uses as well, and prohibit parking between buildings and the street. Then, as an addition to that, we would propose considering a build-to line for multi-use sites and residential building complexes. And it's certainly possible that some multi-use sites may contain drive-throughs. So moving on to some case study example parcels. We have some example private redevelopment that would be possible under this TOD overlay zone. And just emphasize that no projects have been proposed for these sites. These are just examples that staff has selected as representative for what could happen. So these are where the examples are located on that TOD buffer, TOD area map, going from west to east, starting at the Clock Tower Place, which is along Mineral Point Road. This is a commercial center district. And so one of the proposals for a commercial center district is to allow up to 6-story buildings by right. And so this would allow mixed-use development in this area to go up to that 6 stories without getting a height conditional use permit. And this is in a community mixed use area, which is something in the comp plan that also allows up to 6 stories. Moving further to the east, Red Cross site between Sheboygan and University Avenue. So this shows suburban employment district. Again, allowing higher or taller buildings. Suburban employment, I believe, would actually allow up to 8 stories, is what the current chart shows. This shows some additional residential development along Sheboygan Avenue that would exceed that, and therefore under TOD not require conditional use for height. Another site example, Whole Foods on University Avenue. This is CCT district. Another example of community mixed use in the comprehensive plan. This is illustrative of allowing additional residential units within this TOD overlay area. So this exceeds the current threshold for residential units, and the concept shows 165 units, which if this site was split into 2 lots, kind of one for that 3-story apartment and one for the rest, would be allowed under TOD overlay. This is the Yahara Square along East Washington Avenue. This is shown not so much as an example of what could be done under TOD overlay, but kind of to emphasize how this TOD still needs to interface with other city ordinances and regulations. This is under Urban Design District 8, and so development in TOD overlay would still need to adhere to Urban Design District regulations. And so this is kind of illustrative of meeting those UD8 regulations, which show shorter buildings, less height along the Yahara River, but then kind of stepping up to taller buildings further to the west. So we're showing 8-story office, 8-story apartment, both of which meet Urban Design District 8 height regulations. Then we have a much smaller example, looking at certainly residential neighborhoods as well, some of which are covered by TOD overlays. This is an example of what could happen to add a 3rd unit as an ADU under TOD overlay to this particular district. And there are certainly many permutations of this in terms of fitting 3 units potentially on residential lots within some of these neighborhoods. And finally, we have an example on East Washington Avenue. This is a site at the corner of Wright Street and East Washington. Again, another example of how raising that threshold of the number of residential units that are permitted by right can allow things to move forward without conditional use permit. So 92 units require a CUP currently, but under this particular zoning designation, CCT, with this overlay would not. So moving on to public engagement. Broadly, what we're looking at doing for engagement with members of the public as part of this effort is, of course, starting a project webpage to share information with neighborhoods, just general members of the public, businesses, property owners. Have a TOD story map that would walk through transit-oriented development, what it is, how it might impact certain areas of the city. This is something that we've done for various planning efforts, that we've done for the comprehensive plan, and it's a good way to really walk folks through what things mean in a succinct and pretty easy to understand manner. Then we'd have a series of virtual public meetings, working with alders, neighborhood associations, and others to publicize. Have kind of the first set of those, hopefully in May, where we'd have a draft presentation, ask for feedback, answer questions. We would look to do this on different days at different times, same presentation, but really to just capture people when they're able to attend. Then I have a second set of public meetings around September. Have a final draft Q&A, again, different days, different times to engage with people when they're able to talk. So we really view this as kind of a citywide effort. This touches on almost every Alder district. And so we would focus on kind of citywide engagement and not necessarily take things neighborhood by neighborhood. We think many of the issues will cross Alder boundaries, will cross neighborhoods. And so we would kind of approach this as a citywide engagement. Then, of course, folks would always have the opportunity to engage and provide feedback at PCC meetings. And we would be attending certainly a number of those to provide updates to you here at the Plan Commission and then to TPPD as well. So this is a broad outline of the not only an engagement, but the overall timeline, starting potentially next month with publicity for these virtual public meetings, doing those meetings in May, also including racial equity, social justice policy analysis, part of this process. In June, further updates to PC, likely to TPPB as well. And then June through August, any additional analysis, refining of the TOD overlay based on public and Plan Commission feedback. An update to the PC after that. Have the potentially the virtual public meetings then in September. And then introducing Common Council in October if all the rest of it preceding goes smoothly. So with that, just end here on the slide of 5 specific questions we had for you as staff. I'm certainly happy to answer any other questions that you may have for us and provide any other information that you might need.
Thank you, Ben. Are there questions of staff? Nicole, Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. I have a few more, but my first quick question on the 2-story height minimum. I know I've asked this before, so I apologize, but is that a height in feet, or, we've seen projects before. I'm thinking of one that was by West Town Mall where they did kind of like a faux mezzanine that at some point could be a second floor. Can you just clarify what you would consider to be a true 2 stories for this definition?
I think as staff, as we're presenting it now, would be a functional second floor that could be occupied by, a business or residential or whatever it may be.
Okay. And I would assume that would apply only to new construction, not like a level of substantial rehab or something if someone was doing work on an existing 1-story building, or is there would there be kind of a cutoff, I suppose?
I guess I think remodels and things like that of 1-story buildings would be fine. But as far as what a threshold might be, maybe Colin has some thoughts on that, and that's kind of a zoning code related issue potentially as well.
Yeah,
Colin, do you want to?
Sure, thank you. I think there are a few instances in the code where there are percentages of the building that are being touched. It's usually around 50%. So we may be able to do something like that in which more than 50% addition or demolition of the building. Any change beyond that would require it to be 2 stories.
Okay, great. I mean, I guess in terms of some early feedback, I like that minimum. I think if someone's really set on building a new construction 1-story building, then they can move a little farther away and leave that space for someone else to develop higher density. All right, that's all I have right now. I'll have more questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Heck.
Thank you. I have just several general questions, and it's for my own benefit, but I want to make sure we all understand what we're dealing with here. Let's talk about the 2-story height minimum in almost all these districts. That is that in a TOD, that's a zoning regulation, and there would then be no exceptions to that, such as the one that we dealt with a fast food restaurant the other night, because it was still in plan. It was in the plans to be a 2-story minimum, but it wasn't zoned as such yet. So there would be no exceptions, essentially, correct?
I mean, that's kind of what we're showing right now, but that's also what we're here to discuss with you tonight. If that's an acceptable approach, or if there should be some sort of relief valve such that, a one-story building would require a conditional use permit. There are different levels that can certainly be considered.
Okay, I see. But is the way it's formulated right now, there wouldn't be an exception, but that's
correct. That's the current thought. Yeah,
could be conditional uses. Okay, and then just kind of a philosophical question about TOD overlays. We're going to do public engagement, and a lot of the TOD overlay characteristics are going to, I'll use the strong word, violate the comprehensive plan and various sub-area plans. How will you react to those sorts of questions? This is an upzoning, and it violates, the comprehensive plan as well as the neighborhood plan or special area plan.
I think Heather can probably chime in on this. I would just say one thing up front, that I think in a lot of cases, and probably more cases than not, our current zoning in some fashion violates our plans as well, because it's set so far below what our plans actually call for. So I think there is oftentimes a tendency for folks to focus on the inconsistencies in terms of allowing more density, and not so much on the inconsistencies of allowing more density that fits within our plans, if that makes sense. They focus on the incompatibilities with allowing more density in certain areas that don't comply with plans, but not where we're getting closer to complying with plans. So that's one perspective, but Heather, maybe you have some other thoughts as well.
Sure. Thanks, Ben. I think that as we've taken a close look at this, I should say an initial scan of this across the city in the, proposed TOD overlay areas, generally we're seeing that any changes to allowable height are consistent with the comprehensive plan. We're not seeing a whole lot of inconsistency with the comprehensive plan. If you recall, the neighborhood mixed use future land use area recommends 2 to 4 stories. The community mixed use recommends 2 to 6 stories. And so in most cases, in fact, very few exceptions to that, it's consistent with the comprehensive plan. I think, as we've mentioned to the commission in past months, there will be some cases where a 4-story building becomes allowable, where an underlying sub-area plan might recommend a maximum of 3. And so I don't think that is terribly widespread, but I think it's something that is important for the Plan Commission to grapple with and recognize that what we're trying to balance here is, what works as far as general, what can be a complementary use in a lower density or lower height area. Is 4 stories okay? Are we generally comfortable with that? The Plan Commission grappled with this the other night with one example, but I think that, we're looking at big picture recommendations in the comprehensive plan about allowing more intensive uses, and in fact, encouraging more intensive uses around transit in order to boost ridership and, kind of boost that symbiotic relationship between transit and land use. And so I hope that answers it, that all in all, we're not seeing many, if any, inconsistencies with the comprehensive plan, and we're acknowledging that there will be some inconsistencies with smaller sub-area plans.
And thanks, Heather, and do you anticipate the need to change any aspects of the comprehensive plan or sub-area plans as a result of the overlays? Not
at this time. I mean, I think that is somewhat of an early segue into the next topic, the new planning framework. I think rather than going into all of our very small sub-area plans spanning many decades and updating those surgically. I think we'd like to take a fresh approach and look forward and make sure that as we move forward with a new planning framework, we would definitely be taking into account the TOD zoning as part of that consideration.
Did you have any further questions or follow-ups, Alder?
I see Colin has his hand raised, so he must have some in.
Yes. Did you have something to add, Colin?
Yes, just very quickly regarding Alder Heck's question about consistency with the comprehensive plan. I wanted to reiterate the fact that the last big package of zoning text amendments that we moved through brought the densities in line with what's in the comprehensive plan, and that none of these changes are related to density. So we've already moved ourselves into a more consistent position between zoning and the comprehensive plan. And while their buildings maybe have different heights and potentially the conditional use thresholds would change, that actual density ceiling would remain the same.
Thanks. Just one quick comment. The situation that Ben mentioned about the opposite of exceeding what's in a plan, it might be handy to have just a couple examples of that available in the future, because I'm sure there are going to be many discussions that alders in particular will have, but Plan Commission will hear lots of public comment in the future too. Thank you.
That's a good idea. Thank you. Alder Lemmer.
Thank you. I have a question about potential non-conforming uses. It seems like we have a lot more information this time around about what kinds of auto-oriented businesses exist in this area and updated proposed regulations for them. Do we know how many non-conforming uses this would create?
Go ahead, Ben.
Really, I think since we're not regulating auto-oriented uses as being prohibited in this TOD area anymore, we wouldn't really be creating non-conforming uses. It would just be more of a dimensional non-conformity, which is more common, I think, throughout the city than non-conforming uses are. So it's something that is much at a much lower level in terms of non-conformities, I guess you could say, than a non-conforming use. I don't know if Colin and Heather may want to weigh in on that as well.
Colin or Heather, did you have anything you wanted to add? I don't see Heather.
Yeah, I think just building on that, after our last meeting with the Plan Commission, we really recognized these corridors have perhaps the bulk of the city's auto-oriented uses at this point, with nearly 200, and felt a sense of caution from the Commission during our last meeting to not prohibit those uses. And so, I think we really ratcheted back some initial ideas about how to handle auto-oriented uses, and really the one thing we've landed on that directly pertains to them is to require or to suggest a requirement for drive-through facilities to be covered by the building. And so I want to draw attention to one recent reconstructed building right on Willie Street, the Heartland Credit Union. It is a one-story building. They've reconstructed after an interior remodel and gaining more interior space to basically have their drive-through go under that building. And that was a way to meet a requirement like this. It's a requirement that already exists within our traditional shopping street district. And we would just be kind of broadening that out to all of the districts where drive-throughs are allowable. They would need to be designed at that higher level.
Great. That makes so much sense. Thank you.
Did you have any further questions, Alder Lemmer?
Not right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Cantrell.
Yes, the Willie Street example that you just gave, would that under the proposed regulation be permitted? It's in a building, it's not under a building, but
Heather?
That would be the intent. Yes, that if that drive-through can be hidden and not, obviously seen from the street or sides of the building, that is the intent. We might need to make some clarifications in the code, and certainly would take your guidance on intent. But I think from a staff perspective, a building like that would indeed comply with what we're considering.
okay. My other more general question is, could you show me on a map where the suburban residential consistent and the traditional residential consistent districts are? I'm assuming they cover a large area of the area of the city.
Yeah, Ben has that and can pull it up. And these are the Commissioner Cantrell's asking about some of the single-family residential districts. I believe we just have one map showing all of the single-family residential districts, but much of the coverage that you'll see is the SR, suburban residential consistent, and the traditional residential consistent.
And these are the areas within the proposed BRT quarter mile area. And
Yes, they're within the TOD area. That outline is shown in purple, and so the parcels highlighted in orange are SRC and TRC.
okay, one of the concerns I have, and we saw it on this last Plan Commission meeting, grappling with a one-story building and a two-story plan recommendation. And if this is adopted, it's more of an ordinance. So one story would be prohibited. And I can just see the arguments raised if we have a vacant lot or a redevelopment saying, well, this neighborhood, every building on the block is one story, or every building on the block for several blocks is a story and a half. So, why can't I build a one-story building? So I guess those are the arguments we're going to have. And that's a tough one to say, hey, well, too bad, tough, you have to build two-story. So I guess I know that you want our guidance, but maybe what you kind of just threw out as a conditional use with one story might be something that at least allows a relief. Maybe they're doing a duplex as one story, or so that it complies with the kind of the intent, but maybe because they're elderly, they don't want a two-story. Maybe they want a single story. So I guess, my opinion, there should be some relief for this vast area of the city where we have SR whatever and TR to at least consider a one-story building where we may have a majority of them one story. But in some of these areas, I know we have a majority two stories, so it may not come up very often. But when it does, it's going to may be difficult. So that's my question and my tribe.
Either Heather or Ben. Heather, you had your hand up first. I think Ben threw.
I bet Ben can take this one. Thank you.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I was just going to mention, can I emphasize the two-story minimum would be for all districts in that TOD area except for the TRC and SRC districts. So it wouldn't apply to those essentially single-family areas that we were just showing. And then I guess from the other side of things, for the mixed-use and employment commercial districts, I guess I would say that's really kind of the intent is to start to bring a little bit of height to some of these areas, like around West Town Mall and East Town Mall, where the traditional pattern has been one-story development, kind of on pad sites, is to start to move the needle a little bit on that, where we're providing this enhanced transit service.
Did that answer your question, Commissioner Cantrell? Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Well, my question is, maybe we should consider something else, or a relief, but that's something I'll throw out at staff and the commission as a whole. Maybe they think that's a crazy idea. And if they do, that's fine. I mean, I'm up for that rejection, but anyway, I just want to throw it out.
So I want to follow up with a question of you, Commissioner Cantrell. So you're looking or thinking about a relief valve other than in those residential districts that were shown?
No, I'm just looking at those at this point in time. The other districts, I think in commercial areas, I think it's, it could be easier to provide the two-story. Certainly, if you provide residential above an office or retail, but in the residential is the example that I guess I'm talking about.
My understanding from what was just said is that the two-story minimum would not apply in those areas that you're concerned about. Could we get confirmation or clarification of that? Is that okay?
Yes, that is the intent. And so in the zoning districts that are currently single-family districts today, the change that we're recommending is to allow for 2-unit buildings plus an accessory dwelling unit with no height minimums at all. So folks could still move forward with a ranch style home, and that could be the only building on the property. That would be just fine. So just to be clear again, this number one, the minimum 2-story height would not apply to the suburban residential consistent or traditional residential consistent districts. It would only apply to the multifamily residential districts and commercial and employment.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
Okay.
No, that's okay.
So since we're on that topic and have had some clarification, I'd really like to get a sense of where commissioners are on this. So could we stop the screen share for just a minute so I can see people? So could people wave or shake their head yet? I mean, does that sound good to people, to the commissioners? Okay, I'm seeing, okay. So number one sounds good. Okay. Commissioner Cantrell, did you have further questions?
Not
comments?
Not at this point. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Shepard.
Hi, yeah. Question about gas stations. A number of years ago, there was a development at the intersection of Cottage Grove and Acewood. There was an old Century grocery store and Quick Trip. They were proposing to redevelop the site. The residents in the area pushed back hard against that. The reason I bring that up was because at the time, there was a question about the TOD area there that, and it was unclear. I don't know if we ever got a complete answer at that time, but the idea was that the transportation, the overlay district went down Cottage Grove and stopped at Stoughton. This property, though, was once again just down the road at Acewood. And two things happened. One, the residents argued that, and again, I guess this is more not just a question, but also a statement. The residents were arguing that a new gas station should only be in a transportation district, and that because this new proposed Quick Trip gas station was outside of that district, it should be rejected. Staff pushed back on that at the time and said, no, that's not the case, that you can have a gas station outside of, once again, the transportation district. And it went back and forth, and ultimately it was placed on file. That development didn't go through, and I think there's an apartment there now. So my point here is, I think we need to be clear with residents that any future, once again, development that's auto related that it's not restricted to these transportation districts. That was sort of a major, misunderstanding, or at least, once again, the way that the residents of the area, that they conceived it. And then two, is there a proximity to a transportation district that we need to take into account? Again, during that, the discussion on that property, there was some argument that, if it's within a mile or two of a transportation district, these an auto-related activity is just fine and should be allowed. So making part of a statement, but also, once again, a question with these transportation districts, is it sort of a hard stop? And also, just to make sure it's clear, we're not restricting new automotive related, once again, facilities, that they could only, once again, be placed in the transportation district. The other question I would have, and this is just more, again, sort of philosophical, is with gas stations, what's the future of gas stations? Are they going to be called power stations, and that sort of thing? So I'll stop there.
Okay, we'll go to Heather for a response to that. But first, I'd just like to make the observation. One of your comments is that communications are going to be supremely important about this. So I just amplify that. I agree with that. So Heather, do you want to go ahead with the...
Sure. Thanks, Chair Zellers, and thank you, Commissioner Shepard. I think just to back up a little bit on what the intent is with transit-oriented development zoning, it's really looking at our core and highest level transit system. So in Madison, our bus and our future bus rapid transit, and trying to promote through zoning more opportunities for intensive development and redevelopment around that transit. So it's not so much a broad transportation district. We're trying to really tie our land use regulation to the strongest elements of our city's transit system. And so around those transit stops on some of the highest capacity transit in the purple areas that Ben showed, we're promoting the application of boosts to those base zoning districts to allow for one more story or allow for more units, or in the case of drive-through facilities, to make sure that the automobile isn't the most prevalent thing in this transit-oriented area, that instead, if there's a drive-through, that's fine, but it'll be under the building and it'll be, hidden and promote a more walkable environment. With regard to the building heights, a reason to promote, a minimum of 2 stories in a lot of these commercial areas along the transit-oriented development district is so that we're really using land efficiently and that we're ultimately promoting a more efficient use of land so that more people can live near, work near, access commercial opportunities near our core transit areas. And so that's just kind of a backup. We're not really focused on transportation type uses in general here, but we're focused on ways that we can make the areas around our core transit system more walkable and again, promote more opportunities for housing, employment, and commercial activity in those areas.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Commissioner Shepard. Did you have any follow-up, Commissioner Shepard? No.
The only one would just be in terms of gas stations. I'm just curious if there's any, in terms of, do we allow more gas stations in the city? Will we allow, or will those be restricted to certain areas?
They would still be allowed. I think the most practical implication for gas stations, and it's a real one, is that if we do have a minimum height of 2 stories, there are some gas stations we've seen in Madison that employ that few. I think it would be a new realm for many traditional gas station developers to incorporate a second story within their buildings. So that would be a new aspect of the development of gas stations, but they'd still be an allowable use in the same places that they're allowed today.
Thank you, Heather. Commissioner Cantrell. Oops, I'm sorry. Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. First, I want to thank staff for the map showing the area and certain areas, how they were subtracted and added. That was very helpful, a great visual. And I know that we've talked about this before, but I continue to be concerned about leaving out the Hill Farms National Register Historic District. You know, a big part of the history of that district is really tied to being a suburban community with auto-oriented uses, and it feels a bit backwards to me to preserve that when we are promoting TOD. I understand that development can still occur under the existing zoning regulations, but I guess I just wanted to see if you had an update, you know, based on the continued environmental review for the BRT project, if you felt like that was still the best way forward to ensure, you know, compliance with Section 106. And I don't see Tom Lynch on here anymore. He may have more insight into that process, but I just wanted to verify that that was still kind of the recommendation as the best way forward.
I was just scanning my own screen for Tom Lynch because I think he might indeed have the best answer for that. And we can follow up with transportation staff to get back to the Plan Commission on that. I think at this point, we haven't heard anything otherwise from their perspective. So I think the expectation is that local and national historic districts for the time being would not be included in what we're moving forward with. But again, we can check in with DOT staff and confirm that. I'm sorry, I don't have the best answer.
No, that's fine. I mean, I know that we've discussed it before and I don't really want to rehash it. I just felt if there is an update, if that was still on the table. And then I also had a question on the table and the materials that kind of went over the different districts and the changes in height. I noticed that the suburban employment and traditional employment districts had changes in height, but not in terms of units. And I believe that's because that all of those districts require any conditional use for residential. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, that's a topic that I had hoped to kind of add on and get the Plan Commission's take on whether you might want more analysis on that topic. And so it's absolutely the case that any residential units as part of a mixed use building in our employment districts require a conditional use. And I think from a planning perspective, that's been really important, especially in truly suburban areas that aren't well suited to support residents. You know, no parks, limited street infrastructure. In some cases, you don't want that isolated apartment building in a suburban office park necessarily if the area is not well suited with residential amenities. This is something that I think we as staff would like to bring back some more analysis for, because once you're in such a well-served, transit served area, a little bit of that argument goes away. You know, maybe it's healthy to mix in some more residential units as part of the permitted use environment in some of those employment districts. I don't think we have anything close to a full-blown analysis for the Plan Commission tonight, but would be really, we could definitely bring back some more analysis on that question in June, if that would be of interest. I think it could be impactful. Right now, there's a lot of employment areas where the desire is to build residential because of how the office market is looking today. And so perhaps that could be an impactful change within the TOD.
Yeah, I was, what came to mind when I saw that was a lot of the development on East Wash at that time was a TE zoning, if I remember correctly. And I know there has been changes since then that have affected like open space requirements. So, other districts can fit those projects better, but it may still be an instance for where there is a lot of opportunity for residential, like you mentioned. So I would be interested in looking more at that. I did have two other comments just related to public engagement. This is probably a really obvious thing, but I guess I would include materials in the buses and bus stations about this. And similar to what Alder Heck mentioned about some examples, related to how this ties to the comprehensive plan. I remember when we went through the density changes last year, how staff did a really great job of explaining how just because density, said you could have this many units, that didn't mean that you could actually fit that many units on a parcel. You still needed to have a large enough parcel and meet, various setback requirements and everything. I think some examples like that in this case, again, would be helpful, because I think, seeing up to 60 units or something on a table can be alarming without understanding some of the other requirements that come into play.
Good comment. Thank you. Okay. Commissioner Cantrell.
Has staff kind of strategized on how the two-story would affect like a gas station? I'm familiar with the two-story gas station on West Wash, which was recently demolished for an apartment building. But other than that one, there may be a couple others in the city. But does staff want like the pumps under the building, or would the West Wash example be kind of what staff is looking at? And my other question is, obviously on Odana Road, there's a number of auto dealerships, and having two-story there, that may work if they have their offices upstairs, but I guess what I foresee is that a lot of these areas, we're not going to see any of that development anymore. They're going to go farther out, and where they're not impacted by a two-story requirement. So we're going to have an East Washington example on Odana Road, where we have a lot of redevelopment, and maybe that's what we want. That might be a great area for additional residential. But so I guess my question is, has staff kind of strategized and gamed some of these potential impacts of what you're proposing?
Who wants to take that? And what you're raising your hand, one of you staff members, I'll just comment. In other countries, I've seen auto dealerships that are multi-story with showrooms and cars on the second story and third story. So it happens.
And that's how it used to be. That's how it used to be. But when you have like 10 acres of cars, it's hard to get all those in the building.
Okay, Ben.
I guess as far as strategizing, I don't know if I'd necessarily put it that way, but I mean, a potential example for a two-story gas station could be the, I guess, former PDQ, now Quick Trip on East Washington. That's one story, but really there's no reason why it couldn't have been two stories, other than the fact that Quick Trip wants to do their template, or PDQ wants to do their template wherever they go. So, I think there'll certainly be some franchises that would say, we want to do what we want to do, and if you don't allow us to do in this area, we're not going to do it at all. That might be the case in some instances, but there might be some that do make the adjustment and feel it's worthwhile to adhere to the TOD regulations. And I think for some new gas stations, there's really the only thing stopping them from adding that second story is they're used to doing one-story buildings. There's no particular reason why I couldn't have a chiropractor's office or a dentist's office on the second floor of a convenience store or something like that. And then there was, I guess, a second part to your question as well that now is slipping my mind a little bit.
The auto dealerships, the body shops, and those sorts of things.
Well, I guess a lot of what's covered by this TOD area stops short of some of the bulk of the Odana Road car dealerships. There are a handful that are included kind of on the western end of Odana Road, and those could certainly continue as they are. What this, I think, would really do is if there was, an auto dealership that looked to buy a property, tear it down, and install a new dealership there, that's when that two-story would kick in. And again, there might be some that would say, we don't want to do two stories, so we're going to go somewhere else, and maybe that's fine. And there is some aspect of this that says that, maybe auto dealerships might be better located somewhere else that's not an immediate great access to transit. So it's really kind of that balancing act, I guess, as far as what the commission and ultimately the council feels is appropriate for these areas.
Thank you.
Yeah. No. And feel free, commissioners, as you ask questions, to make comments about some of these too, because we do have some questions that we're going to want to answer.
I do want to raise a question about the build to line. And I don't, if we're talking, if that's coming up later, but I have a question about that. We just adopted an ordinance that says if you have trees in the terrace, you have to set the building back because of the trees. And we have regulations that have setbacks because of a transition zone. We just considered that on the building on Speedway. I'm assuming that those regulations would still apply under a build to line. Or maybe staff can define what the build to line is.
Thanks for raising that. That was one of my questions too, to describe what you mean by build to line a little bit more. Heather.
Sure. So absolutely, this would respect that, the distances that are required from the property lines for things like trees and other. The build to is really to avoid buildings that are set back, 60, 100 feet from the street with a sea of parking in front between the street and the building itself. And I think where we see this as most impactful is those large multi-building sites where the phase 1 building might be a really tiny building built near the street, and then the phase 2 and 3 are large, say, office buildings or apartment buildings built 100, 200 feet back from the street. What I think all we're suggesting here is a street orientation, that the buildings must be, I'm going to throw out 20 feet. Please don't tie us to that, but the buildings need to be within 20 feet or 30 feet of the street with no parking between the street and the building. We're not trying to say that the buildings would need to be built to the property line, but just that they would need to be within a maximum distance of the street, if that makes sense.
Good, thank you.
Good, thank you. That answers my question too.
Mm-hmm.
Alder Lemmer.
Thank you. I just wanted some clarification, and maybe this was covered by the last question. I did not understand what prohibit parking between buildings and the street meant. Does that mean no surface parking between the building and the street that the building fronts to? Or is it no surface parking between the building and the street on either sides? I couldn't visualize what it meant. So.
Who's taking that one? Heather again.
I can give it a try. I think that we're still open. I think it could be, hey, let's pick the primary street, the most transit-oriented street, and prohibit parking between the building and that street. Or it could be all streets. I think today in the zoning code, it's usually the primary street where that regulation is most pertinent.
Okay. All right. That helps. Thank you very much. That's all I have right now.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Hagenow.
Yeah, I just want to kind of jump in on the question Alder Lemmer just posed. And is it the most transit oriented street or the most used street? Or because I know with the Speedway building, you can kind of, and some other buildings that have come up, the developer kind of gets to choose what street is their front end, basically. And so I guess I would just be a little concerned that somebody would use a side street as their front street and then have a bunch of cars sitting in front of their building on the most transit used street, if that makes sense. I don't.
Heather.
Sure, I'll try that one. I mean, I think and Ben, I don't know if you want to bring up the map again, but I think generally in the transit-oriented development overlay area, there's going to be a street that's really obviously like the main transit street. Let's say East Washington Avenue, Atwood, Monroe Street, South Park Street, etc. I think the question is, imagine a side street off of one of those. So you turn from East Washington onto Baldwin Street, let's just say. Could you construct some surface parking between your building and Baldwin? Maybe that's fine, but maybe the regulation would say, as it orients to the main transit thoroughfare moving through the area, you wouldn't have parking between the building and that main transit route, if that makes sense.
That does. Yeah, I guess I just want to make sure that's like clear in there. Not that, if a developer wanted to build and they addressed their building as Baldwin, and then they had parking on the side of the building that fronted East Wash. That was kind of what I was getting at there. So I just want to make sure that's clear.
So good points. I think that's something that staff will need to take a look at and make sure that the TOD zoning confirms or clarifies where the parking's allowed between the building and a street, if anywhere. Maybe it's only behind the building, not fronting any street. So that would be something to look at too. Ben.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the considerations I want to mention. I think for these TOD areas, it's not just about presenting a good face to the transit street. It's about having development that's friendly to transit no matter where it is in the TOD area. And so to a certain extent, any parking that buffers the building from a public street is decreasing the pedestrian friendliness of the area and kind of impacting the transit friendliness, regardless of whether or not it's the transit street or not. So that's just something else to keep in mind, I think, for us as staff, and then maybe for others as they look at this as well.
Okay, good. Yeah, I would be inclined not to have parking in between a building and a street, whether it's the main one or not, as my comment. Alder Heck.
Thank you. I'm back to a gas station example, sorry. Related to this question, if I were a developer putting in a new 2-story gas station in a TOD overlay, could I have pumps in the front or parking? That's a situation where this seems like it would be tricky.
Does seem like it would be tricky. Ben.
I mean, that's kind of why I had brought up that PDQ example, where they kind of have the building is right along the street. You can still see the pumps from the street as well, but they have the building pulled up right to the street. So, accessible to cars who want to fill up, but also accessible to pedestrians that might want to make use of the convenience store aspect of it. So I think, parking under what we just talked about, at least, would probably not be allowed in between the building and the street for a convenience store or for a gas station. Pumps, that's probably something we need to refine and make sure is clear in the ordinance. It's not the level of detail that we really have for you here tonight.
Yeah, it seems to me that parking at a pump is still a form of parking, but yeah, we'll have to think about that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Alder Foster, and then I'm going to ask staff to put up the questions again, because we're going to want to run through those. Alder Foster.
Thank you. Yeah, I think in the same vein as a lot of the questions around the auto-oriented uses, I mean, I think what the proposal looks pretty good to me. I think it makes sense to focus more on kind of form than use. I think there might be opportunities to think more about expanding some of our auto-oriented use prohibitions, but probably not with the TOD, maybe more from a going out from downtown kind of perspective. So thinking about that for later, but on the form side, I had the same questions around like pumps, vehicles that are for sale, sort of parked there, the repair station with cars parked there waiting to be worked on. So I think thinking through all those details and just being clear that in my opinion that all of that should be like whatever you can do inside of a multi-story building. If it's an auto-oriented use, okay, but none of this sort of a bunch of cars around kind of between the building and the street, I guess, and whether it's technically parking or if they're doing some other temporary or long-term outside car activity. So that's feedback on that one, I guess. And then the question, the one that folks I think already gave thumbs up to, I thought that made sense as well. I think Alder Heck mentioned maybe having an out. I think that is something to really think about. I can imagine an existing one-story building that maybe 60% gets remodeled or something, triggering it, and everybody would actually want the thing to happen and not force a second story. So just thinking through that and maybe having some kind of way out. But and then my other question, I guess, was just on also Alder Heck asked about the interface between our plans and this. The way I'm understanding it is typically the plans kind of come into play for rezonings or conditional use permits, right? I mean, that's sort of when they kind of sort of have a real impact. And so in this case, really, it's actually almost like in order to pass the overlay district itself, I think the Plan Commission needs to affirm that that's consistent with our adopted plans. But I think then once that happens and the overlay is on the books, right? So it's like a map amendment, I think, then there shouldn't really be a question of plan compatibility with what is allowed or permitted via the overlay district. And so I just wanted to, I guess, does that make sense? And is that accurate?
Heather.
Yes, I think it makes sense, and I think it's accurate. I think the way I understood Alder Heck's question earlier was, might we be creating instances of permitted uses that are taller than what our underlying plan recommends? And yes is the answer. In some cases, we would be allowing for a 4-story mixed-use building where an underlying sub-area plan might recommend a maximum height of 3. So, but if it's a permitted use, right, it's not subject to discretionary review. Right.
And I guess if there were a conditional use permit for some other reason, it wasn't for something that is allowed under TOD, then the conditional use permit would be for that other thing. So you still wouldn't, plan consistency wouldn't really, I mean, I guess you all will deal with it, but it seems like there's a clear path where you're saying, no, whatever we're evaluating that's not, that requires the conditional use is what you're evaluating against the plan document. So, okay, I think
right.
that helps. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alder Foster. Would you please put up the questions again? Okay, I am going to want to run through these, but I want you to take a look at them, commissioners, and think about those. And then I'm going to ask the questions to be taken down, and I'll read through them for you because I want to be able to see everybody on the screen. So I'll read through them quickly and then we'll go back through. We've already talked about number 1. Number 2, are the other draft TOD overlay boosts / restrictions doing enough? Too much, just right? 3, does the commission feel any further analysis is needed at this stage? Does the revised TOD overlay geography look reasonable? And is the commission comfortable with the general timeline and public engagement overview? So if you could take that away now. And I would comment, obviously, we've had input beyond just those questions. that staff will be incorporating in their next iteration, but I want to make sure that we do hit on each one of these that they have specifically asked about. So the next one is the residential density and intensity approach. Permitting the next level up of intensity is good. Any comments about that, or any questions about what staff is asking about? Commissioner Cantrell.
Well, one question I have: we just increased many of the permitted number of units in many of these districts in just last year, and now we're increasing them, doubling them, and sometimes even more than that under the proposed TOD. And I guess the question I have, we've received a lot of very quality buildings because we've had conditional use, and I guess I'd like staff's input on, and for example, if the Speedway building would have been on one of the routes, that 31 unit building, I believe, would have been permitted. Plan Commission wouldn't have had the ability to review it. No public hearing. It would have been, I believe, just a permit, and the zoning administrator looking into plans and complying with the code and all that sort of stuff. So I guess, are we losing anything by increasing the number of units, 100 units in some, 60 units in other, that were 8 before, but I guess that's my question. I guess I think that we get really quality development in Madison, and sometimes the neighborhood makes the project a lot better. And I guess I don't want to lose sight of that by going too far. But again, we need housing. We need housing where we want it, and along these corridors is exactly where we want it. So, but that's my question for you, Heather.
Thank you, Commissioner. Heather?
Yeah, what a great question. I mean, that is kind of a very important overarching question. So I think I'll answer this in a couple of different ways. First of all, some of you remember a Madison where we didn't have the existing zoning code, and where every single building that went through was a planned development that was uniquely and individually negotiated. Every detail was individually negotiated by the Urban Design Commission, Plan Commission, and ultimately Council. We redid the zoning code back in 2012, adopted in 2013, with a lot more form-based and design-based requirements that are absolute, that aren't negotiated each time. Some of those are building materials, proportion of window openings in our commercial and mixed-use districts. Those are just some examples. And so we think as a city, we've moved, in a direction where a lot of the things that used to be individually negotiated are now just covered in our base zoning code. So I think that helps with some of the concern that you're raising. Not all of it. I think absolutely you're right that residents who are involved in development review, certainly our commissions that are involved in development review, push things toward something better, a better outcome, particularly from a design perspective. That happens often. I think that still most of the unit counts that you'll see in front of you are fairly low or moderately sized buildings. They're not, we're seeing so many 80, 100, even 200 unit projects coming in. And those largest projects are still going to be, by and large, reviewed by commissions. Another thing, everything that's in an urban design district will still have design review, even if it doesn't come to the city's plan commission for review. So those are some of the things that we have in place that I just think it's important to be thinking about. But the concern you're raising is right at the heart of all this. Like how much are we willing as a city to let housing move forward easier, without all of those different levels of discretionary review, and at what scale? And so I think it's absolutely important. It's, as you know, it's well grounded in our comprehensive plan around promoting more intensive development and getting more housing quickly along these core transit routes. But that is the trade-off that I think the commission and ultimately the council will have to examine again.
Okay, great answer. Thank you.
So Commissioner Cantrell, since you asked that question, do you have any comments then about that number 2 request from staff?
Based on that answer, I guess I'm somewhat comfortable now with that. I do think that many of the projects that get a lot of input, there is an urban design review, there's a landmarks review, there's other committees that are reviewing a project, and that they do have to comply with the design regulations that we've incorporated. And I think that I guess I'm a lot more comfortable now than I was right before the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alder Heck.
Thank you. And Chair Zellers, is it appropriate for me to give some input?
Whoops. Sorry about that.
No problem. Chair Zellers, is it appropriate for me to give some input on Commissioner Cantrell's question also?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. This is more free-flowing than a regular plan commission meeting is. So yeah, go ahead.
I was thinking about the Speedway example and the remark that I think is true, that oftentimes projects have gotten better with neighborhood input. But I'm all for the Speedway example in particular. It may be that Plan Commission passed that as proposed, but I suspect that we're not done with that yet. At least Alders aren't, I think that we unanimously approved that project and felt like it was appropriate under the zoning. I feel that that's an instance where keeping conditional uses would not benefit that project because of the objections of the neighbors and the extension of the process that could be coming. So, but I'm sure you could come up with examples where conditional uses certainly have been advantageous, but that one I'm kind of still sticks in my craw from the other night. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Okay. So Alder, since you signed in, do you have comments about that second, the residential density intensity approach, permitting the next level up of intensity is good?
I'm relatively comfortable with that. Okay,
thank you. So I would ask if other commissioners, could you indicate that that sounds good, or if it doesn't, please raise your, okay, I'm seeing, okay, everybody's okay with that. The third item is approach to auto-oriented uses needs further refinement. As we heard, auto-oriented uses are still basically allowed. The only change is on the drive-through in many instances. Ben, did you have something you wanted to comment on?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, are we running through the December 10th summary or the 5 sections?
Oh, sorry.
Presentation.
Yeah, I think I might have looked at the wrong place. Could you throw those up again?
Sure.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah, okay, thank you very much. I'm on the right track now. Thank you for raising that. So the second question is, are the other draft TOD overlay boost restrictions doing enough, too much, just right? And that is similar, I think, to the other question that I asked, but if you could go back to full screen. So are people comfortable that the other draft TOD overlay boosts restrictions are doing enough, too much, just right? Okay. Kathleen, are you okay? You're the only one who I haven't seen. Yes. Okay. Very good. Then the third is, does the commission feel any further analysis is needed at this stage? We got quite a bit more as a result of commissioners' questions the last time, quite a bit more analysis. And there was a big change on the auto-oriented use recommendation. Are there any other questions that commissioners have in regard to informational needs in order to do the best job on this TOD? Commissioner Hagenow.
Whoops. Thank you. I guess I'm just curious if there's a sense of how many or maybe this are all single family home areas kind of bumping up against the I think, Ben, one of your slides. Sorry. Hey, go on. Sorry.
Okay.
You still might hear him in the background for a little bit, but
that's okay.
Sorry about that. My question was about if we have a sense of how many 6-story buildings or even 4-story buildings will be bumping up against single-family residential home lots. And because I can just see that becoming an issue in the future, right? Where a 6-story building is allowed by right, and it bumps up against 4 or even 5 single-family homes.
So
if
Ben
there
or
was a
Heather?
question in there, yeah.
Yeah, there was a question in there.
Yeah, that's an analysis. We don't have a specific analysis done on it yet, but it would be doable for sure to bring back.
That would be good. The other comment I would have related to that issue is the concept like we have of some places of the step back and the angle of step back, if it abuts that kind of low density use. So that would be a way to maybe ameliorate the worst impacts. So if that could be something that would be considered, that would be good. Margaret, you are on the TPPB, is that correct? Or TC? TPPB? Okay. So Margaret, go ahead with your question. Yeah, okay. Or your comment.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak. And obviously, I haven't been taking part in these conversations, so forgive me if this has already been covered. But as you've been talking about the overlay districts and the issue of automobile-oriented businesses and whatnot, has there been any discussion, or will there be any discussion of not just gas stations and that type of auto oriented development, but also businesses that say rely on delivery vehicles or commercial deliveries, and even residential properties that rely on, for example, paratransit pickup and drop off. I can think of some fairly dense developments already in this corridor that do require space off of their main entrances for more than one vehicle to be able to do pickup and drop offs for people with disabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So if it hasn't been considered, I think it should be considered and somehow explicated in these rules or brought forward, because we know even with our current transit corridors, for example, the 600 block of University, we have this conflict already where we have businesses that you may not think of as auto-oriented, but they've got delivery vehicles constantly parked and blocking bus traffic. So,
yeah, good question. Are there staff comments? I would just endorse that concern because there are delivery vehicles almost anytime we are out walking, in the downtown area, parked vehicles, in delivery vehicles, in bus lanes, so that we don't want that kind of problem preventing good transit. So Heather or Ben, or who wants to address Margaret's comment or question? Heather.
Yeah, I think right now I'm listening for things we still need to give some more thought to and bring back. And so this is one of those. I don't have a great answer this evening. I think we can look at existing zoning standards for parking and loading and delivery and just see through that lens, make sure that we're not creating any new barriers or obstacles for what you're mentioning. So thanks for bringing that up.
Good. Okay, great. Thank you, Heather. So that's another kind of analysis or assessment. Okay, then moving on to question 4, does the revised TOD overlay geography look reasonable? I'm seeing shaking heads. Yes. Okay. Alder Heck.
Thanks. I'm going to go along with the gang, but I am going to express some hope that a few aspects of the TOD could be considered beyond the quarter mile or into national historic districts. Maybe it's just the parking minimums, I don't know, and not something related to increasing permitted heights and things. But I kind of recognize that asking for something like that is going to delay our process here and require a lot more discussion. So I'm just kind of expressing the fact that I wish we could, within a half mile rather than a quarter mile, have just a few things extend further away from the actual transit line itself. So that's my fantasy. Thanks for indulging me.
Okay. We do have some areas that go beyond the quarter mile in mainly, it looked like East Town, West Town kind of area.
Yeah, I saw there was a little bit between Gorham and Johnson Street on the Isthmus too, and I was a little curious about how that decision was made. But otherwise, I'm fine.
Okay. My question of staff is, do you need any further information from the commissioners about 1, 2, 3, and 4, or do you have a pretty good sense of where we are? Alder Lemmer.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention something with number 2. I was just wondering if staff could provide a recommendation on whether to not have parking between the main street and the building, or to not have parking between all streets in the building when they come back.
Okay. To make that clear.
Yes.
Yeah. And again, my sense or recommendation or vote would be that it shouldn't be between the building and side street, main street. It should just be at the back. Anyway.
I'm inclined to like that too.
Okay. Other commissioners on that topic? Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up on that. Okay. Commissioner Cantrell.
And also, staff provided a nice schematics of some of the development sites, Red Cross and others. Could they provide kind of a schematic of a two-story gas station? Obviously, a two-story building is easy, but how would that affect the pumps? And because that's really the issue. One of the questions I have, I don't see pumps under a building myself. It's probably not even permissible. I don't know, maybe it is. But anyway, I'd like for them to kind of come up with a concept of that, showing us how that would work.
Thank you, Commissioner. Alder Heck.
Thank you. I do have some concerns about this discussion about parking on various sides of the building. I can imagine commercial uses where saying no parking on the side of the building could be very limiting. And I think we need to discuss that a little bit or go through some examples to assure ourselves we're not limiting some commercial uses in particular.
So that would be number 3, more analysis is needed before we come to a conclusion, is what you're saying. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm sure staff can get us some more information about that. Thank you. Okay, then I think we've covered 1, 2, 3, and 4. Again, staff, do you have anything that you want more from the commissioners about 1, 2, 3, and 4? Seeing no raised hands of staff. Okay, number 5, is the commission comfortable with the general timeline and public engagement overview? Okay. Okay, so that looks like a yes. Okay, anything else from the commissioners or from staff on this topic before we move on to the next item on our agenda? Okay, seeing no raised hands, we're on to agenda item 4, Legistar 70577, update and discussion of the proposed planning framework. And I will say one thing before we get on this. Heather and I had a bit of a conversation about how much we were trying to kind of pack into this this evening, because 8 o'clock is when we're cutting it off. So we agreed that if we had more things that we need to cover with this, if we don't get through everything, then we will go into our next special Plan Commission meeting. So I want commissioners to feel that they have adequate time to provide input on this. So did you have anything, Heather, you wanted to add with that to that comment about timing?
No, not necessarily. I think, we want to try to move through this as we can tonight. There's been a lot of work done based on your input before. And I think if there are some specific things that we can bring back, obviously more than happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, we will move to Linda Horvath, who will be starting off the presentation. And if there's anybody else who will be presenting, Linda, if you could introduce them at the right time.
Sounds great. So I'm gonna. Okay, well, thank you everybody for having us here tonight to talk about the planning framework. We have done a lot of work on this, as you well know. We presented this to you last July, and we're here today to show you some of the differences in the proposal. And can you still see the full screen of the slides? I imagine you can. Okay. So we provided quite a large packet to you and put a memo on the top that shows you some of the differences between the proposal back in July and the proposal this evening. We're going to give you kind of a higher level overview of our current proposal. A number of us are going to present this evening, and I believe the next person after me will be Brianna Collins. We'll kind of hand it off as we go. The proposed planning framework is meant to simplify and standardize sub-area planning in Madison. It's based on 13 higher level area plans, as you saw in the proposal, and complementary community development block grant supported plans in neighborhood areas. The area plans are going to cover the entire city and be updated on a recurring schedule. They'll be considered the guiding plan for future land use and infrastructure investment. Our community development block grant plans focus on near-term improvements and capacity building and partnerships in areas of the city where we have concentrations of people living with low to moderate incomes and generally higher numbers of people from Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. What's new or changed about what you saw in July? So we did a comprehensive racial equity and social justice analysis last September. We also put the proposal before our ResG Community Connection staff team for review and feedback. We updated background data and maps. We considered the Philadelphia district plan example as we made some revisions. We also put together a 5 primary benefits piece that is in that proposal, a table that differentiates the area plans and CDBG plans. It's a little bit more basic and straightforward table than the one in the last document. We put further emphasis in the document that new special area plans and more traditional neighborhood plans will be done only in rare circumstances. We made slight modifications to the proposed plan area sequence. And we modified the budget slightly to reflect the varied demographics of the different area plan geographies. The mayor and city staff are generally comfortable with the proposed planning framework. And staff would actually like to initiate the first area plan this summer and follow that with subsequent area plans starting every 6 to 9 months thereafter. We have a couple of questions for you tonight and obviously allow you to ask other questions as well, but are you comfortable directing us to initiate that first area plan, which would be in the northeast part of the city this summer? And then is there anything the PC would like staff to refine in advance of initiating that Northeast area plan? Again, we conducted a comprehensive racial equity and social justice analysis of the planning framework. Most of the focus by that group, which included some racially diverse community members and staff from the Madison Public Library and Department of Civil Rights, most of that focus was on the public participation plan for the framework. A couple main things that came out of that were wanting to minimize the burden of repetitious input requests and address barriers to the planning process for marginalized communities. Another thing that came up was that we need to focus on that plan tracking system and establish indicators like wealth distribution trends and patterns of gentrification to help keep this planning framework accountable in addressing negative impacts on people living with lower incomes and those from communities of color. I'm going to hand off the presentation now to Brianna.
Thank you, Linda. So Linda previously added that we worked on the 5 primary benefits. So we'll go over that. Next slide, please. The first being the clear plan recommendation. So the map is showing area plans that overlap each other. The city has 70 sub-area plans and many overlap. And with those overlapping areas, we have overlapping plan recommendations, which can cause confusion. For example, there are city staff that in many cases will cite different recommendations from multiple plans, and also often different stakeholders focus on the recommendation in this specific plan that best supports their preference, resulting in stakeholders citing different plans. So to address this confusion, the planning framework has 13 discrete geographies to reduce overlapping plans, and these plans will be updated over time. And rather than stacking a new plan, we'll update it update the existing plan. Additionally, the area plan land use recommendations will update the comp plan's GFLU map, removing another layer of planning confusion. Under this planning framework, some area plans that do not reflect current city policies and priorities may be retired through the review and adoption of an area plan. So this will help having clear plan recommendations in the future. Next slide, please. The next primary benefit will be full city coverage. Currently, there are portions of the city that do not have sub-area plans, which are the areas in gray. Some of the area plans that lack a sub-area plan include parts of the city with higher proportions of residents living with lower incomes and people of color. This can be a disadvantage since plan recommendations can bring city investment and guide future change. So having full city coverage will help address this issue. Next slide. Thank you. And the next primary benefit we'll have is the frequent plan updates. So some of the city sub-area plans date back to 1980s and early 1990s, which are the areas in the lighter colors, and a lot has changed since then. So this planning framework envisions the 13 area plans will be developed over an approximately 8-year period and will be updated approximately every 10 years. So having a schedule in place. Next slide, please. Another benefit will be consistent plan topics and higher level recommendations. Area plans will address consistent set of topics. This is showing the mock example of plan mockup, which one of my colleagues will further cover later. Currently, the city sub-area plans vary in terms of topics that are covered. For example, some plans include emphasis on sustainability, while others do not. Likewise, there are recommendations in sub-area plans that vary in detail. Recommendations in some of the plans are overly prescriptive and extend beyond what the city can control, which gives a false sense of what can be accomplished. So to help with that, it will have more consistent, higher level plans. These area plans will have higher level recommendations, relying on supporting processes and tools for implementation. Next slide, please. And the last, but not least, primary benefit will be enhancing the coordination on city initiatives. By having a schedule for when area plans will be developed and updated helps first the city, so we can communicate with stakeholders when a specific area plan will occur. Second, with the area plans covering the entire city and on a consistent schedule, there's opportunity for increased coordination with other city initiatives. For example, the Economic Development Division could schedule a business survey in conjunction with an area process, which can help inform area plan recommendations. And finally, this will also help with community feedback. Area plan processes can help inform multiple city efforts, and this planning framework can help increase utilization of stakeholder feedback, reduce city costs, and not having as many community feedback processes happening across the city, and also help reduce engagement fatigue, which is also what we heard in our ResJ analysis. So this will also help address that issue. And I will pass it back. I'll pass it back to Linda so she can introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Brianna. And I believe this is this Urvashi? Are you presenting now, I think?
Yes, Linda.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. So a little bit about how we establish these area plan boundaries. We generally try to follow physical features like roads, railroads, and other transportation corridors, or natural features like creeks, etc. But the general intent in establishing these boundaries was to try to keep these boundaries consistent, so there's not too many changes over time. So generally, these plan geographies, they vary quite a bit in population and demographics, and that could influence whether or not the planning process is a shorter or longer process. But we'll talk more about that when we discuss the plan sequence later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So we created several background maps that are included in the list of materials we put together as a way to inform us during this process. We looked at several different things like sub-area plans that have been adopted by decades to look at areas where there's overlapping plans, areas that currently do not have a sub-area plans. We also tried to see how these planning boundaries relate to census tract and block group boundaries, and also with Alder districts. Also looked at some demographic information with these background maps. This is an example here that we're looking at with this background map. We're looking at percent people of color by census block groups. This is showing 2018 ACS data for 5-year estimates, and generally showing the distribution of percent people of color as they break down with these area plan geographies. Next slide, please. So we also looked at the demographics, and the table here is illustrating the demographics of these area plan geographies. So the population here is broken down by race and ethnicity, and also showing the percent people of color for these area plan geography. We also looked at the number of housing units and the occupancy and the vacancy rates across these area plan geographies. In terms of population, these area plan geographies, as I mentioned earlier, vary quite a bit. So, for example, the far northeast area has the lowest population of close to 500, and the near west area has the highest population of close to 37,000. In terms of percent people of color, the Northeast. Sorry, my cat. So in terms of percent people of color, the Northeast area plan had the highest percent people of color, approximately 57%, and the Near East area plan geography had the lowest percent people of color of close to 26%. Also, in terms of housing units, like population, the far northeast area had the lowest number of housing units of close to 281 housing units, and the southwest area had the highest number of housing units of close to 16,000. The downtown area close second to that. Next slide. So the plan mockup, as Brianna mentioned earlier, we had put together a plan mockup, which is a hypothetical example of an area plan to generally illustrate what the plan contents and the outline for these area plans could look like. The example area that we looked at was the west area. Generally, the intent of this plan mockup was to lay out the plan contents and also identify what various topics that these area plans should be covering. As Brianna mentioned earlier, we're trying to keep a consistent list of topics that these area plans would cover. So a standard list of topics that the table of contents here is showing that these area plans would cover, and also the various maps that we would need to create to inform us about the background information for the area, and also the recommendation maps that would go along with the document. The list of maps also has some grayed out maps that are not included in the materials we put together, but we envision that these would be maps we would like to include in the area plans that would inform the process. In terms of the unique needs and characteristics of the area, we might have some additional topics in addition to this consistent list of topics that we are envisioning. So like Brianna mentioned, that there could be sustainability that would be more important for a certain area geography, or if there's a need for a market study. So then those additional topics would then be included with that planning process. Next slide, please. These are some examples of that plan mockup of the list of maps that we created with the mockup to visualize some of those maps that we would need to accompany with the planning process. So this is showing the planning area. It generally helps us illustrate and understand the extent that these area plan geographies would cover. Next slide, please. And this is another example of a map from the plan mockup, which is showing the land use and street plans. So illustrating what the land use categories would be for these area plans. Also, the mockup has a table in it that shows how these land use categories that are identified for these area plans relate to the comp plan land use categories. And also these area plans would have building height recommendations as well. Next slide, please. In terms of the planning process and the timeline, we're generally looking at roughly 12 months, a year, a little over a year kind of timeline to develop these area plans. The image here is illustrating the various phases that would be involved in developing these area plans. So generally, the initial phases will focus on starting from getting authorization to proceed with the plan process, coming up with the detailed scope and schedule for the plan, gathering data and background information, developing a public participation plan that outlines the different outreach methods that would be utilized to engage the public throughout the planning process, identifying issues and opportunities that the planning process would be addressing, and then moving on to the next phases with developing some initial plan concepts and recommendations and implementation strategies. And then developing the draft plan would then go through the city review process through the various committees and commissions for their review and adoption. And then finally, the last step with the plan implementation, which is going forward, what would be the steps that need to be taken to implement the plan and how it will be monitored and tracked over time. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about our plan sequence. As mentioned, we're kind of looking at about a 1-year planning process for most of these areas. However, given different demographics, populations, all that stuff, it's going to vary. We took into account a lot of comments we had from Plan Commission members and alders about trying not to saddle people with like 2 projects at once. So what we're trying to do is kind of move around the city, not pick similar places, kind of make it as equitable as possible, and just kind of like go to places where they're just a little different. So no one's like, well, why are you doing the same thing? So our thought was to start with the Northeast area. There's a CBDG plan and recently finished East Town Special Area Plan. So we can kind of work on getting used to how we figure out how to work with these things. And so when we move on to the next one, which would be number 2 on the west side, we have a good idea of how we're going to kind of work with these. And so moving forward, we're always going to have 2 plans going after the first plan, usually start about 6 months apart, and we'll just keep moving and moving and moving and updating as much as we can and filling out all the missing areas. One thing to notice is that if you look at the far west side and far east side, they kind of come in the later stages. And that's due to a lot of work that's been done in the last couple of years of updating those plans. So we think that they'll be viable for the long run, and we can get to them a little later. But yeah, so basically we're just going to try and spread things out, get things done, and hopefully this will all work out, because it seems like a pretty good idea. And I think Linda's up next again.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Ryan. So the city, as we've been talking, will continue to do community development block grant supported plans in areas of the city where there are larger concentrations of people living with low to moderate incomes and people of color. In some situations, we'll also be able to, as Ryan was just talking about, align CDBG plans with the area plans. And that's really the ideal. It will allow us to do increased coordination and make sure that we're not developing inconsistent recommendations. It allows us to be more efficient. In situations where it's not possible to do this, and there will be those cases and at times, we'll have those plans focus on different topics. We also wanted to, so that this table that you're seeing is showing you a little bit of the difference between those CDBG and area plans. And largely speaking, what we're talking about with the area plans is focusing more on transportation networks and larger areas of land use recommendations. A way to kind of characterize it would be transportation street systems and bus systems, as compared to with CDBG plans, which will focus more specifically on intersections, maybe pedestrian and bike improvements that come out of that CDBG public participation process as being needs. Differences between the land use, we're talking about larger areas of land use with the area plans, whereas with the CDBG plans, we tend to want to look at those opportunities for public-private partnerships. An example might be the Salvation Army site over in the Darbo-Worthington area. Some relationship building and community partnerships were developed during that planning process that helped kind of catalyze and keep that vision going of the neighborhood to create a community serving mixed-use activity center at that site. So the table shows you some of those differences. We also wanted to bring up something that came about during your review last year regarding historic resources. The city is planning to undertake a reconnaissance survey for historic resources within the planning areas and develop recommendations for intensive surveys based on findings that might lead to National Register historic districts, identifying local landmarks and local historic districts. The rationale with the reconnaissance survey is that we would ideally fund them directly, the survey directly, and then potentially set up grant projects for National Register districts. That might lead to property owners getting access to preservation tax credits. The survey could also be used for grant projects for local walking tours and that sort of thing. And another rationale is it may help us open the door for any area that's interested in local historic district designation. We're going to try to sync this reconnaissance survey effort with the historic preservation plan. That plan breaks the city down into about 14 different districts. And so I also, welcome Bill Furling. He's also on the call today, and others who may want to jump in on that topic. And they may not. They may just be available for questions or answering questions. So I
see that Bill unmuted. Did you have something you wanted to add, Bill?
I was just going to say that I'm available, that I can answer those questions, but I think the planning framework provides a great opportunity to jumpstart one of those priority recommendations from the historic preservation plan that was adopted in 2020. And they just fit together really well. And as Brianna was mentioning, one of the primary benefits of the planning framework is to coordinate various city initiatives. And this is a great example and great opportunity for that.
Thank you, Bill. So another thing we wanted to touch on is interfacing with existing future sub-area plans. We're going to continue to consider the recommendations in existing sub-area plans during our area planning processes. We want to make sure that those recommendations, however, are in alignment with city policy and city objectives in order to consider them as a part of an area plan. Those are some of the criteria. We also are thinking about how might we do potential plan retirement of sub-area plans. And again, a major thrust of this proposal is to try to eliminate inconsistencies and confusion among the different plans that exist right now. And so possible criteria might be, let's say the sub-area plan is 30 plus years old, and potentially a lot of those recommendations have already been implemented. Or again, maybe they're not as consistent with today's city policy and recommendations. So that's something we're still thinking about. And also criteria for undertaking future sub-area plans that aren't area plans or CDBG plans is something we've talked quite a bit about during this process. And I know the Plan Commission has had questions. It's something that we wouldn't do unless that type of plan might address recommendations for an unforeseen or urgent need that's not addressed in the area plan or might not be addressed until the next area plan update. And an example we use for that is that Oscar Mayer plan that we did. Of course, that property came for sale, and we really felt we had a responsibility to take on that plan because of the timing there. Another thing that might cause us to do a different type of sub-area plan would be addressing an equity concern or a different need in the community in detail. Another thing that might lead us to do that other type of plan would be leveraging a funding opportunity that might be time sensitive. And the Bus Rapid Transit Station Area Planning Grant is an example of that type of criteria. Here you see the Northeast area plan boundary in blue, and then our current or ongoing Hawthorne area community development supported neighborhood plan that we began a couple months ago. Again, one of the reasons to start with the Northeast area, as Ryan mentioned, is that we're already doing a CDBG plan there now. And if we started this Northeast plan later this summer or in the fall, we would really be aligning with that kind of meat of the CDBG planning process of refining our recommendations at that time, so we could align with that process. Another couple reasons: bus rapid transit will be coming to this area in 2024. And then also US Highway 51 is about to be redesigned. That process is about to start. And that corridor goes right through the middle of our area plan here. And now this is a repeat of the earlier slide. We're now kind of moving to that question and answer phase. And so I don't know if Liddell, if you wanted to run this portion or if you want me to go ahead and pose the questions.
I'd like to go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda.
You're welcome.
So why don't you take the questions down for right now? Off the share. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And I would like to ask commissioners if you have questions of staff before we move into the questions that they've asked, but feel free to comment about those questions too. Commissioner Heck.
Thank you. I'll first say I am generally comfortable with this in all aspects, but I'm wondering about, and maybe I missed this, but is there a public engagement component to the overall change, not with regard to the specific planning efforts, and how we're going to introduce this to neighborhood associations and residents who may be accustomed to having a special area plan?
So, Linda, are you taking? Oh, Heather. Go ahead, Heather.
Sure. I think that's a great question. I'll say that I did send the notice of this meeting and this topic to all alders, but would really welcome input from the Plan Commission and alders in general about that very question. You know, I think we could certainly push out information. We have a great network of associations citywide that we could share this information with, but we don't have a plan in place for engaging with folks about the process itself. it's a little bit, I'll call it meta. I think it's something that is a topic that's accessible to very, very few residents in the city of Madison to really want to grapple with and engage with. And so it's something that we, I think as staff, struggle with as well. How best to get this out there and make it easy to communicate to a wide variety of Madisonians. And so would really welcome your input on that.
Thanks. Just a quick thought. All of that, you're right. There is a small percentage of the population that will appreciate or be terribly interested in the overall scheme, but it will certainly be likely a knowledgeable segment of the community who will want their voices heard with regard to this change. So I guess I would recommend that if there is some sort of small package put together that we can refer people to, I don't know whether that's a slide package or another one of the little videos, that the slides that Linda showed that detail the motivation for doing this are the most important, rather than the fine details of how the eventual scheme was arrived at. I mean, that's what it's all about, is equity and all those other concerns. So I hope that we can do something like that. I know you don't have a lot of time to invest in this, but I'd recommend something really stressing what Linda was talking about.
I would agree, Alder Heck, that would be something to put out, something that is a good overview about why, and then maybe some more depth that people could go to if they are interested in delving further. But I think that communication is really needed. Commissioner Spencer.
Yes, thank you. Great presentation. Thank you. I appreciate you covering all of this. Everybody did a great job. Thanks. And I'm really happy that the area plans will be covering larger areas that haven't had an area plan. It's always kind of bothered me that some areas have no plans. And then other areas have so many plans. It's been such a disparity. So I'm glad. I really support this. I did have one small question for Linda. You presented that chart that showed area plans versus CDBG plans, and you did a great job of explaining the differences and the focus. But there are a couple areas that had like a check mark in one area and not a check mark in the other area. Could you just explain that to me quick?
Sure, and that really is meant to show you that, the area plan would cover it if it has a check mark, and maybe the CDBG plan doesn't, if it doesn't have the check mark. I mean, that's generally what that means. I mean, there may be some differences, but for the most part, that's what we're trying to show you, is that yes to those with checks and no to those without, for those particular topics.
But something like placemaking that is in the CDBG is still would be important in the area plan.
Do you want to put that slide up, Linda?
Oh, sure, I can.
That one particular slide she's asking about.
I will go ahead and do that, yes. Oops, sorry about that. That just did something. I'm just going to leave it in this view.
That's okay.
So it's kind of difficult to see. It's a little bit small. Let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. So I apologize for that. But so placemaking, you brought up that example, and that's something that, it is something that might be important to people in an area plan, and it may come up during that process. But generally, we were thinking that we wouldn't spend time during the area plan process on that type of thing, and possibly direct that kind of request or interest towards something like our neighborhood grant program that offers funding for that type of activity, or other types of ways of getting something like that going. But I will also invite others on our team to respond.
Anybody else on the team want to comment about that? Raise your hand if you do, please. I think your team thinks you covered it well, Linda. So
okay.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Did you have follow-up questions or other questions, Commissioner Spencer?
I just had one quick other question. The staff had mentioned coordinating the area plans with other activities in the city, and I'm assuming that this would also go with like capital plans or infrastructure improvements. Looking at area, maybe I was just thinking like bike lane striping or pedestrian, striping along intersections or something like that. I don't know, maybe Heather wants to answer that.
I am happy to start and then happy to be followed by others who have really delved into this more deeply with other agency staff. So I think one of the things that we're trying to do as a whole city is to make sure that we're really efficient in the way that we engage with Madison residents. Sometimes folks that we as a city, the global we, are trying to engage with say, well, I just had another process that traffic engineering was out here 2 months ago and you didn't hear what I already said. Well, this is what sort of that fatigue of like being asked again and again questions. I think we see a great opportunity for multiple agencies to be focused on a single area of the city. So, major large scale park planning would be occurring in conjunction with the plan that the planning division would be leading here. And certainly everything would feed into you mentioned the capital budget. If we see, infrastructure investments that need to be done, those would either be identified as is sometimes typical, this will happen in conjunction with private development, or yes, this is a high priority that the city needs to take on in the next 5 or 10 years. And that feedback would then be shared with engineering staff who would put together their capital budget request. I mean, in short, I think we're trying to make sure that among all of our different city agencies, we're really coordinated in these efforts and engaging in the same geographies at the same time. Someone else may be able to take that on a little bit better.
Did that answer your question, Commissioner Spencer?
It did. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Did you have anything further, Commissioner Spencer?
No, I think I'm maxed out for now.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Cantrell.
Yeah, great job, Linda, and other plan commission, planning department staff. This is very understandable, very thorough, and I like the framework as you've proposed. My question is, do all the 13 focus areas, would they have a CDBG plan prepared in them, or would they be a portion of the plan, the plan area, or how does that work?
Linda, do you want to take that?
I can do that, yes. And I'll let others also join in. But so the CDBG program provides support to us for planning in areas of the city where 51% or more people live with low to moderate incomes. And we use a number of other criteria to define where we plan next. And so that would have to be the case.
Sure.
And we do have a schedule that we are kind of working on as to when we'll roll out those next several. And we looked at that when we came up with this plan framework area sequence, so that we will be trying to align those plan areas or area plans with the CDBG processes. Okay. But we don't, there are some areas of the city that won't qualify.
Okay, that's what I
thought.
That
type of plan, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Anything further, Commissioner Cantrell?
No, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Hagenow.
Thank you. I guess maybe I missed it. Did we take into the consideration the town of Madison annexation into these numbers? And the reason I ask, I guess, is on the map with kind of the layout of what order the plans are going to be done in. kind of the south central side of Madison, looks like number 7, I think it was. And so I don't know if that's like 2 or 3 years out from now or 4 or 5 years out from now. And I'm wondering if it makes sense to bump that up as well, just because of all of those residents coming into the city that will just kind of be out there in la la land until we get to them. So
Linda or Heather. Heather, it looks like, is going to comment about that.
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think we tried to foresee most of the town of Madison attachment when we did the South Madison plan just recently. And so that South Madison plan really encompassed the vast majority of town property that's going to be coming into the city. There are a few exceptions a little bit further west than that. There's a couple sort of town islands, and then even on the near north side, there's another one. But I think at this point, since that South Madison plan is so new, that area is shown later in the sequence for that reason.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. Clears that up.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Alder Heck.
Thank you. This is most certainly for Heather. Heather, I'm thinking about, the Plan Commission is having this great discussion about this new framework, and one of the questions that we're kind of being posed is, are we comfortable with this, and that the mayor and staff are generally comfortable with this. I'm interested in 2 things. Who has decision-making authority with regard to this new framework? I'm wondering about what questions might come our way. Is this really an executive branch decision? And also, are there budget implications that you anticipate in the future with this new planning effort and framework?
Great questions. So I think we have asked other cities how they've approached it. We know that Madison has its own ways of doing things too. I think part of your question is still a little bit open, but I think it's been common in some other places that we've done some research in for this to be, this is a way of doing things. This is a way to approach our work plan, and a decision has either been made by an agency head, certainly with coordination with policymakers, including mayors and city managers and others. I think that another way that we could do this is to have sort of a blanket, resolution by the council that endorses a new planning framework moving forward. Would welcome the Plan Commission's guidance on that question too. And then I want to try to address the budget implications. So yes, there is a budget implication to this, and we've made sure that the mayor and finance are well aware of it. Ultimately, obviously, the council has final decision on the budget. We think that the budget for each of these plans will vary quite a bit based on the population and some other unique characteristics of each area. But roughly, $30,000 to $60,000. Someone jump in if that range is wrong. It can range pretty dramatically based on the underlying population. But what we'll be asking for in our 2023 budget request is approximately $50,000 to utilize toward planning, sub-area planning in the years to follow. So on an annual basis, we think about $50,000 will cover this, and that's going from virtually nothing. A lot of our plans, and part of the reason that they can take so much time is because we don't have any budget sometimes for public engagement. And when we're trying to approach a broader geography quicker, we know that we need some budget to help facilitate, especially the public engagement pieces of these planning processes as we move forward. So yes, there will be a budget request. We're working with the mayor and others on that bigger question, and would like to hear from the Plan Commission as far as your thoughts on whether this needs a formal endorsement from the Common Council, or is something that you see as more of a work plan shift in the way that the planning division and ultimately other agencies will function moving forward. And I guess that's predominantly the alders on the plan commission I would love to hear feedback from the three of you. It doesn't have to be this evening, but at a later date, perhaps. Your input is very welcome on that.
Thanks. I think I would prefer to think about it a bit, but my initial thought about the budget is that there certainly will be savings also in the long run, I assume. I don't know about net savings, but and also if I think what you were saying is that a lot of staff time goes into planning efforts where there really isn't any specific funding for it. Maybe there was a chunk for Odana area in Easttown, but it ends up getting a lot of it folded into their regular work plan, and there's not extra funding. So it'll be an interesting calculation. My initial inclination is that transparency is good, and that therefore a resolution might be appropriate, but I'll have to think about it. Thanks.
As a former alder, I would have to say I agree with your initial thought on that. I would give it a little more thought to, but that's my initial inclination also on that subject. Alder Lemmer.
I just wanted to agree with that. I would like some time to think on it, but I also think that, my instinct is that transparency is also a good thing. So my thoughts are aligned with Alder Heck and with the chair.
Thank you. Are there other questions of staff? Other questions? Okay, then I am going to move on to the questions for the Plan Commission from staff. And I would also ask the Plan Commission to make any other observations that you want to make in terms of what is before us, because this is a big change for the city. So I think that given your context of plans and how we use them, I think that your input would be a good thing. So the first question, the mayor and city staff are generally comfortable with the proposed planning framework. Staff would like to initiate the first area plan in the summer of 2022, with subsequent area plans starting every 6 to 9 months. And if Plan Commission agrees with this, clearly you're endorsing the general concept of what is being proposed. So how do you feel about supporting the first area plan in the summer of 2022? Okay. Okay, looks like there is agreement. My comment would be, to me, it seems really ambitious to be planning for each one of these plans taking 1 year. That seems like a fairly condensed time period for what seems to me like a large initiative. I see some other commissioners shaking their heads yes about that too. Okay, second, is the Plan Commission comfortable directing staff to initiate? Oh, that seems like kind of a duplication. What am I missing here? Staff would seek official authorization. Well, I think we already answered both of those questions. So it seems like basically a repeat of number 1. And then 3, is there anything the Plan Commission would like staff to refine in advance of initiating the Northeast Area Plan? So this would have to do with what was laid out really in that sample that was provided to us. Is there? Yes, Commissioner Solheim.
I don't have any specific feedback in terms of things to refine. I just wanted to say one of the many things I like about this framework is having some of the higher level recommendations that were mentioned in the presentation. And that's probably part of also wanting to set expectations and good communication with people. I think a challenge with some of our neighborhood and sub-area plans, and I mentioned this to Heather, is when it gets to be very specific for certain parcels or very specific language about things that we should preserve. And that process can be driven by, sometimes by a fairly small group of people within the existing neighborhood. And I think, as we've talked about on recent projects, we really need to take into account also that the plan should reflect the broader policies and direction of the city as a whole. So I think that this move towards having a higher level set of recommendations and recommendations that are really focused on things like city infrastructure and bike lanes and, some of those things that we really need to lay out what is kind of like the groundwork that surrounds development that may, fill in between it. I really like that concept and gives a little more I don't want to say flexibility, but ability to adapt with, the area and the city as we evolve over time.
Thank you, Commissioner Solheim. Alder Heck.
Thank you. I'm thinking big picture again, and I don't know as if we're going to need more information on this. You might be able to just give an answer, but I'm thinking about how this intersects with the 10-year comp plan cycle, and is having these scheduled plans going to reduce the effort that has to go into the 10-year comp plan because it won't be so ad hoc? Is it going to interfere with that or be repetitive in some ways? Or I'm just wondering how you feel about how it interacts with that.
Heather, did you want to take that? Oh, I see that Brian has his hand raised. Brian, you want to take that one?
Thanks. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Brian Grady from the Plan Division. And so, so we have, we think that this will actually make the comp plan updates easier because through each of the area plans, we'll be updating 1/13 of the GFLU map. And so we're basically going to turn the GFLU map from like a once every 10-year exercise to something that's a portion is updated.
And just for the listening audience, in case there is any general for future land use. Is yes. What Brian's referring to. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
And so, we think it's a better way to update the generalized future land use map, the GFLU map, because we're doing it at a medium scale and not just covering the whole city at one time, which we cover. Some of our citywide plans, I think, attract again just a smaller audience of stakeholders. So I think it's better to update the map at a more of an area plan scale, a middle scale. And that will take care of that large effort, that one large piece of the comp plan update process. And so, really, what would remain through our 5-year interim updates of the comp plan or our 10-year major updates of the comp plan would be everything except for the GFLU map, which is a big part of that process. So we think it's a better way to update the generalized future land use map. And then that leaves a smaller amount of material to be updated in the comp plan, which are really just the goals, strategies, actions, and then some of the other growth framework items we have in there. But we think it's just a better way to do it on more of a rolling basis. We don't know if as we go around the horn of these area plans, we don't know if we're going to do a comp plan update and then we'll go through when that cycle will hit, when the 10-year update will hit in terms of the cycle of area plans. We don't know. That may not be the same plan that we're doing for the first time after the comp plan update each time, if that makes any sense. But we think that it can be independent. But overall, we think it's a better way to update the comprehensive plan's GFLU map.
And the map you anticipate would be updated every time a plan is done, or would it be every 5 years, or?
And that can be determined by the city yet. We laid it out. There's two ways. You could either, when we adopt an area plan, it could be in a formal amendment to the comp plan to reflect that, or we could pick up those area plans that were adopted in that 5-year interim update or the 10-year full update. It's still kind of outstanding. But so, yeah, a question to think about, and maybe with our first area plan, as that's going towards the adoption process, we would need to make that call if we're making a formal update to the comp plan or not.
Right. Okay, thanks. And I now remember that I think we had some brief discussion about this before, but it's clear to me now. So thank you.
You bet.
Okay, are there further comments about, Commissioner Shepherd?
I'm not sure if this fits in with the last question, but I'm just curious. This is probably for Heather. If you receive full funding for this, what other barriers do you foresee? Other, once again, roadblocks or problems do you foresee with moving forward with this project? Everything other than money. So if you had all the money, the budget that you need, are there other potential roadblocks in terms of accomplishing this very, once again, sort of ambitious project?
We always face uncertainties as planners. I think one of the big things that we need to be really forthright and transparent about is that the intent is to be less detailed. And I think that issue is something that is a bit of a threat to this entire framework. If we go into planning for a much larger geographic area than we're used to planning for, but find ourselves trying to do it at the same level of detail as what we might have tackled a very, very small geography with 3 years ago, it's not going to succeed. We would be spending 5 or more years on each of these areas. That we can't do and achieve the main reasons for moving toward this. And so I think I'm kind of mentioning, a potential barrier, but also the need to really be transparent that the intent is to go a little bit more shallow on our plan recommendations and instead rely on our zoning code, rely on other efforts that are just relationships between city staff and agencies and neighborhood associations and residents. Go deeper where it makes sense in the community development block grant areas, especially, but make sure that we're really transparent about the need to go to be broader and shallower in the level of recommendations that these plans will produce. So I think that's a threat and something we want to get ahead of. And Brian may have some more.
Heather, could you comment too about UDDs, urban design districts, because those, along with the more detailed CDBG plans, also are a little more fine-grained. So you want to comment about that? Or maybe that's a Brian.
I don't think anything changes with our urban design districts that we have based on this. Those are ordinances that are covering particular geographies, much like local historic districts. Those aren't planning efforts, they're ordinances. And so I think this wouldn't change the urban design districts in the city.
My only point was that they're something like zoning and historic district. It's a little more fine-grained, like CDBG planning is a little more fine-grained than what these larger area plans would be. So we've got various things that I think address our city and the form of the city. So is there anything the Plan Commission would like staff to refine in advance of initiating this whole changed planning process? So it sounds like in general, this is a thumbs up to go in this direction. Is that correct? Okay. Then I think that we have gotten through this a little more quickly than what I thought might happen. So thank you, staff, for doing a really good think of this whole thing and presentation of what the overall concept is. I think that has made it go smoothly and be digestible. So thank you for that. And thank you, commissioners, for having looked at things in advance so that we could go ahead and go through what is really a very large change and a complex, really, look. So thank you for doing that. So with that, then, is there any business by members? Seeing no raised hands. Any further announcements by staff? Nope. Okay, then I'd be looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Commissioner Cantrell. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Shepard. I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Thank you all very much, and have a good weekend.